Hello and welcome to the final session of our Suncast Clean Energy Summit, brought to you by our main sponsor, SunGrow. So thankful for them, and also by Radiant Reed, our track sponsor. Today is our focus on innovation, just like last Wednesday was a focus on impact. Sorry we're getting started just a little bit late, as I was just wrapping up our previous session with the National Renewable Energy Lab on how they're spurring innovation as well. This is the final session, as I mentioned, and we have a doozy for you. We've got an esteemed panel, folks that I look to as leaders in the national and international discussion around how energy storage is providing expansive opportunity, not just for clean energy, but for distribution models writ large, for utilities and for commercial users. So I wanted to take a look today at several different angles for that. We're going to bring in just a moment Jacqueline DeRosa from Ameresco, Omid Bakube from Yatta Energy, Merrick Kubek from Fluence, and Zach Ward from SunGrow. But before we do that, I'll pull this one down and say hello. My name is Nico Johnson. If you're just joining in and haven't been a part of any of our previous sessions for the Suncast Clean Energy Summit, you can find out about our schedule and about next Wednesday, which is our next session of, or our next day for our final session of the summit, focused on Latin America. You can do that at suncastsummit.com. Today, we're wrapping up our innovation track brought to you by Radiant Reed, and we're going to jump into a topic that I think is just fascinating, and it is exemplary of how innovation is driving clean energy forward. So, from residential to large-scale utility projects, energy storage, and predominantly in the form of batteries, is just leapfrogging other applications for finally providing firm and transactive power to the grid from renewables. We're going to explore today how developers are using storage as a force multiplier and where we can expect to see further business model innovation. As we do that, I'm going to go ahead and bring in our first guest, Jacqueline DeRosa. Hi, Jacqueline.
Well, hello, Nico. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you here as well. Jacqueline, you are the VP of Energy Storage for Ameresco. Could you give us a quick introduction to the work that Ameresco is doing to integrate energy storage?
Sure. And I'll tell you a little bit about Ameresco, too, and why they're in a very successful position in the energy storage space. So Ameresco has been around for about 20 years, publicly traded company, and started out as an ESCO, an energy efficiency company, and has really leveraged that platform to bring in other types of expertise and develop additional types of renewable generation, and now is a leader in the energy storage space. And we are very active in the distributed energy storage arena. So we work with all types of customers, both public and private. And as a result of some of our federal government experience, we've done some very complex microgrids. And now we're leveraging those types of intricate solutions into the smaller scale, into both public and private arena. And all of them involve energy storage, providing multiple use applications. So it's a really neat place to work and a great space to be in. So thank you again for including me with the Suncast Clean Energy Summit. It's really great to talk about this stuff.
Indeed, and it's fascinating to have you all here. So I'm going to go from talk about applications at the microgrid and DG level from an integrator's perspective, as well as manufacturing. We've got two manufacturers of storage technology, and then we'll talk as well with Merrick from Fluence about what's happening at the utility level. What are driving the energy storage models, not here to the US, but around the world. So I want to bring up Omid from Yatta Energy next. Omid, welcome.
Hi, Nico. Thanks for having us.
Great to see you, Ben. You guys won the Solar Power International, or North American Smart Energy Week, Startup of the Year. Can you give us a quick, maybe 1 to 2 minute intro of why you might be considered the Startup of the Year, what you guys are working on that is paradigm shifting, and a little bit about what how Yatta is working in the world?
So Yatta is an energy storage company that's trying to simplify we Sorry, I went to mute.
That was my bad, sorry.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yatta is an energy storage company, and our mission is to simplify the deployment of energy storage. And we learned very quickly that in order for storage to get really scalable and into the built environment, specifically for behind-the-meter applications, we had to drive for simplicity. And what we've pioneered at Yatta is a product called the Solar Leaf. It's the world's first thermally regulated battery that's designed to integrate directly behind solar modules. So a lot of people liken this to the microinverter. Think of the microinverter of energy storage. And our beachhead market is to focus on commercial rooftops, where we integrate directly onto racking. And the weight of our battery actually serves as a ballast weight. And before people jump on the temperature bandwagon, that's our core technology. So we've patented and developed a way that's now manufactured and deployed of protecting batteries against both extreme heat and extreme cold. And these are the two barriers as to why this format wouldn't work. So we're excited. We've launched the product now to strategic customers, and we're looking to do a full launch of the technology in 2021. Sorry, Nico, I can't hear you. I think you're on mute. There we go.
Thank you. I accidentally muted you, and then I didn't unmute myself. I was saying it has been fascinating to watch you guys as a startup hardware company on a really interesting and efficient pathway to market, both from a capital perspective and a team, relatively small team, comparatively small capex in terms of how much it took to get your product into market, which is another remarkable story perhaps we'll have a chance to chat about. Before we do, we'll talk about a company that has no lack of bandwidth on the capital side. SunGrow Power is one of the largest inverter manufacturers in the world with, Zach, what was it, over 100 gigawatts deployed? Is that right? You just unmute you there. Let's see if we can get you unmuted.
Yeah, we just celebrated 100 gigawatts of delivered product, so it's a huge milestone. It's the first time that's been achieved by any of the inverter manufacturers. So we're all celebrating this month, big milestone.
Yeah, fantastic. And I remember that SunGrow was one of the early companies that I became aware of that was bundling storage. From an inverter manufacturer perspective, a lot of innovation for inverter companies has been around how to bundle the rest of the balance of the system, make it easy, and sort of package that insurance product in the way of a warranty. SunGrow has innovated as one of the early and strongest global manufacturers to really bundle storage into their product. So we're excited to have SunGrow not only helping bring this to the world, but also explain a little bit more, which we'll get into depth on, about the work that you guys are doing with bringing energy storage to both large and C&I scale projects that you guys are working on.
Right.
And the last, yeah, sorry, Zach.
No problem. I was just going to thank you for having SunGrow participate.
Indeed, yeah. And last, but certainly not least, we'll bring in Merrick Kubek. Merrick is a 30 under 30 Forbes list winner for innovating on business models, and that is because he's been a contributor largely to the launch of the Fluence platform, namely in the UK and Irish markets. Merrick is the director of the UK, Ireland, let's see if I get this right, and Middle East and Africa markets. Is that right, Merrick?
Yeah, that's pretty good, Nico. Hi, good afternoon, I guess, to everyone in the US. I think the European calling in, so it's a nice dark evening out in front of me, so apologies for this sort of more ghastly glow, but great to join you.
Absolutely, and great to have you here. We'll talk a little bit in a moment about some of the work that you guys have all been doing in integrating storage at the utility level and what the drivers are for storage to be added into lots of different projects. So an esteemed panel here, as I mentioned, looking at manufacturing, utility scale integration, C&I integration, and even microgrids. I'd love to, as a starting off point, for the panel, just get a feel for where, how do you see business models being transformed by the introduction of energy storage? We've got a number of folks who have been involved hands-on with the development of solar projects and other types of clean energy projects, since long before storage was a household capability or a household name, as it were, for solar projects. So I'd like to start with you, Zach. You've been one of the, I'll say the OGs in the solar space, having worked at a number of leading manufacturers. Where do you think, what do you think is the tip of the spear for us around innovation with energy storage, and how is it forcing the industry to modify business models?
Boy, that's a very large question. Maybe I'll attack a few aspects of it. I mean, when it comes to the utility scale plants in North America, we see very few plants that aren't evaluating storage as part of the project. So anything that's really 2021 and beyond has some kind of storage analysis, has already approved storage. So it's in our everyday lives at SunGrow in North America. It's everyday situation where we talk about how to structure, how to architect the system, what's the most cost-effective way to deploy different architectures, and how will they affect the PPA or the developer, the money side of the project. And so that started maybe a year or two ago, and it's just gained more speed as we go on. As far as innovation goes, we're really focused on lowering the cost of storage, whether it be sourcing the battery or eliminating different components within the system, making the overall system just more cost effective. As you reach different thresholds on the cost basis, you enable more and more projects and more different PPA structures and finance structures. So we're trying to get basically the projects to pencil.
And I think we lost Nico for a second there. So I'll jump in and take over for a little bit. I guess, yeah, we'll just continue the dialogue. He asked us to ask each other questions. So Marek, tell us about the European market for energy storage. How is it differing from the US market from what you know?
Sure. So I guess there's a couple of interesting trends. So from a utility scale perspective and for sort of front of meter storage, there's maybe two different trends that are emerging that we're seeing. One particularly interesting is the Irish market at the moment. So Ireland is really a leading market globally for renewable penetration. It has a very high wind resource. They're already about approaching 40% of electricity being produced from wind, and the aim is to get to 70% by 2030, legally sort of binding target that's written into Irish law. And to get to 70% variable renewable generation in just under 10 years, it's a huge growth path. And if you look at that being an average over the year, it means during any instantaneous moment on the electricity grid, the need is actually going to be to have up to 95% of electricity coming from wind, from solar, from essentially non-synchronous sources. And that historically has been sort of thought of as impossible. So one of the things that's really being driven, I'd say, by need, by market, which is a forebearer of many other markets around the world, is that need to get towards 100% renewable energy. And in order to get to 95% in real time, there are various things that you need to do for grid stability. And one of the things that we've been able to demonstrate with some of the projects that Fluence has delivered for customers in the Irish market, the first super fast responding batteries in the world, is that you can respond in hundreds of milliseconds. So 10 to maybe even 100 times faster than you would traditionally have resources responding to balance the grid and maintain stability on the grid without necessarily needing the fossil fuel power plants to provide the traditional stability, the inertia to maintain the grid. So that's a really big and interesting one. And the second, which maybe we'll come back to because I don't want to hog the time on the upfront, is around actually the grid, the infrastructure, transmission network, distribution network, and how you accommodate renewables on the grid, and particularly using storage instead of transmission lines to bolster the grid, so virtual transmission lines. It's also a really interesting evolution of business models and taking energy storage into a sector and replacing a technology that you wouldn't traditionally think you could replace, like a pole and wire alternative.
I wanted to say thank you to Omid for being quick on the draw there as my internet dropped out. And I'm really fascinated by the ways that each of you are actually helping to challenge the status quo in the industry, or rather the industries where in which you participate. Jacqueline, one of the ways that I've seen Ameresco grow, as you rightly mentioned in the beginning, you all started out as an ESCO, an energy service company, where by and large you were offering energy savings, looking at energy efficiency. How's the work that you all are engaged in at Ameresco changed over the last 1 to 2 years as we've seen energy storage costs plummet? You've notably become a leader in microgrids, and microgrids I think are an area that many folks don't understand. What are you seeing as challenges to customers' needs that energy storage is offering solutions to?
Oh yeah, sure. So Nico, you're absolutely right. Ameresco has a solid history. We've successfully completing energy savings and renewable projects with, as in our prior role as an ESCO, and now as a renewable generation developer, for federal and state and local governments, healthcare, educational institutions, housing authorities, commercial and industrial customers. And, I personally have a lot of passion for energy storage. I'm in my second term on the ESA board, on the executive board, in fact. And so I see that energy storage has many use cases that can be applied to many of the customers that I just listed that are Ameresco's traditional customer base. Whether it's, a local government deferring some type of transmission and, or distribution charge or a capacity charge, or a hospital deferring, lowering their electric bill. But you are right. I find the microgrid use case really cool right now. I do live in California, so resiliency is really important. And energy savings is viable because of the rate structure here. So Ameresco has implemented some cool microgrids with the federal government. One in particular that I love to talk about is Paris Island, where the energy storage resource is used for multiple purposes. So, I mean, it provides the assistance to, isolate from the grid, and then it can provide reactive power. It can, provide backup generation for the CHP that's serving critical load at the Marine base, and it can load follow. So it's a cool demonstration of all the things that one battery can do. And I'm not just, a battery fan. I like energy storage in general, but in this instance, it's a battery. So the idea is to take those experiences that have been successful from a technology perspective, and then translate them into other use cases and to other of the Ameresco, types of clients. And we just are starting a project up in Humboldt County at a wastewater treatment plant where we're putting solar and storage, and the storage, really is providing resiliency, but the goal is to show some form of cost savings. I mean, we want our customers to ultimately be budget neutral and show savings, and obviously an emphasis on sustainability and carbon reduction. So hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. You mentioned cost savings, and one of the things that I think about, and we often hear certainly as I've been in sales, like Zach and Omid on the hardware side, I hear a lot of developers like Ameresco use the phrase component or partner agnostic. That seems to me like it's an open opportunity for a developer to say, well, we'll work with whoever we like. But it also, in my experience, sometimes leads to this idea of bespoke engineering. So I want, from a cost-saving perspective, Jacqueline, how, and I'd love to hear thoughts from the rest of the team as well, how are we seeing cost savings really delivered on the storage side? I think that this idea of cost savings has been a bit of a hard one to answer for storage for the last 5 years because storage has been so expensive. So I'd love to hear you, Jackie, and then Omid, I know that you guys are really thinking around cost savings as well for your clients to try and deliver the product, and welcome the rest of the panel to chime in.
Yeah, that question made me start itching. Okay.
Sure. So I think with storage, it is a little bit more complex, and so the answer is going to differ depending on the use case or the client or what it is we're trying to do. But I like the idea of being, agnostic when it comes to who and how we package a solution for our customers. We can find local support often. We can find the lowest cost. We can find the strongest warranty. We can find what works for that particular situation. And I think that's an advantage. Some might disagree, but for us, it seems to work. But you're right, though. I still have to say, making the storage resource always pencil, it's going to depend on what you value. So, there's certain places where a demand charge reduction is going to make a lot more sense than others. But some clients might value sustainability and resiliency, and maybe those don't have an actual dollar amount, that we can quantify in a normal situation yet. That's coming, because it's definitely coming. We're seeing new proceedings and new ways of evaluating the advantages of that resiliency and sustainability. So it's a work in progress, and obviously we're hoping that we'll get eventually an ITC for energy storage, not just paired with solar, but for standalone storage as well. And we're looking at a lot of really neat incentives throughout the country in the United States to help bridge that gap, because really a lot of the value proposition of energy storage is not quantifiable yet. So we try to plug into those incentives and make a project work.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was wondering if anyone else was going to. I was wondering if anybody else was going to tag on. I have Omid, you and I have had discussions around ways that you guys are sort of helping reshape the economic model or the argument around whether or not storage makes sense. And I think that we've seen this with other components that make up the balance of system of a renewable energy project. Which is not just talking directly to the cost, but talking to the added value of a project, either through expansion of the project, ability to improve interconnection, et cetera. How are you seeing the dialogue with clients around ways that rooftop energy storage, in the case of what you guys are doing, can amplify or be complementary to a solar project? And what other benefits, ancillary benefits, do they see other than just the ability to store energy?
Yeah, Nico, I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about your first question that you asked was about where energy storage is today. And I liken everyone to this ratio. If you think of solar storage as the computer and the internet, we're kind of at that cusp where we're figuring out what the internet is, right? We're just now starting to figure out what energy storage really means. And we're probably, the next phase will be our dot-com bubble for energy storage. And then from there, you're going to see all kinds of business models that really can take the full value of what energy storage can do, right? There's a wheel of 21 different services. And I would say energy storage pencils out today. It's just at what increment. And what Yatta brings to the table is we make it pencil out at any increment. For a lot of other players, we found this very interesting fact in the California market, for example, that 92% of the market for commercial solar is less than 500 kW systems of PV, but there's only a 3% energy storage attachment rate. And we asked ourselves, well, why is that? And the reason is that there's a fixed cost to energy storage. And where a 30 kilowatt hour system could really pencil out and make a huge impact for that customer on their demand charge reduction, no one wants to do that system because no one can make money because they have the same fixed costs in permitting and designing and customer acquisition, whether they do a megawatt hour system or a 50 kilowatt hour system, right? And it's kind of leaving this whole void in the marketplace. And you would argue that all the players that are doing energy storage right now are kind of focused on 8% of the market. They're all competing against each other for 8% of the market. And that's where we really come in. And I've got our product here, which is really easy to show you. This is the solar leaf. And it's literally the size of a large briefcase and it integrates.
Let's see you do that, Merrick.
I was thinking where I could, where I could bring in a 40-foot container or something. Yeah.
Well, exactly, right? We were talking to one customer who said, I already know where I'm going to go on the building. I always end up having to go next to the trash cans, right? And another comment he made is when you're putting energy storage on the ground, everyone's got an opinion. When you put it on the roof, there's very few stakeholders that care how it looks, right? And so we really see this format. I mean, we're not trying to compete with the large scale systems, right? We really see this format as enabling more storage and really opening up this marketplace for the customers who would have never considered storage. And the other really unique thing that Yatta brings to the table is you can have a 300 kW array, which is roughly 900 solar panels, and you can do 20 units and do 20 kilowatt hours of storage. And the economics around that 20 kilowatt hours of storage can actually pencil out in less than 2 years. So it brings an incremental approach to energy storage that the marketplace currently doesn't have. And we think that's a game changer, and we're very excited. And you also talked about the other benefits. We've actually created a whole new value around our product, which is the ability to increase DC PV without having to upgrade interconnection. Because now that you have storage on the DC side, you can actually increase the amount of PV on an application without having to upgrade that interconnection point.
Wow, that is really cool. So it essentially means that you can oversize the system because you're adding storage to it. Lots of people talk about that on the utility side, but you don't hear that in the C&I space much.
In some cases, the savings from the interconnection actually pay for the storage.
Wow, that is fantastic. You know, one of the things that, to the conversation we were having with Jacqueline around microgrids, I think about this topic of scalability. In fact, Merrick, you and I talked about scalability, and it's one of the things that you are thinking a lot about with regards to how Fluence integrates and helps utilities. I wonder if you would have any contribution there from the utility perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting follow-on actually from what Jackie was saying, because Fluence is a big believer in the how do you describe it, technology agnostic open architecture approach. We quite deliberately haven't gone down a vertical integration route, like a Tesla route where you make the batteries, you put everything together in-house. We're quite deliberately CapEx light and really the opposite of that, where you design the architecture and the software and are able to plug in from a handful of large-scale key suppliers, different chemistries, different technologies, different form factors. So there's a lot more flexibility to meet a specific project need. But it's exactly right. The challenge that you have there is how you meld that with simplicity and scalability. Because if you have to custom engineer every project differently, that takes a huge amount of effort, and it is arguably possible to do at large scale because you're talking about a smaller number of projects. But Fluence is now well over 100 utility scale projects, nearly 2 gigawatts of projects around the world, all battery energy storage. So very significant volumes, and each of those take very different form factors. So we've thought a lot about how you design that form factor so that you can plug in different technologies. Particularly from an electrochemistry side of things, it's interesting because it's not really being driven by stationary storage at all. We're taking advantage of what's being developed for the automotive space. So it requires some creative thinking, but if you have a building block that you can customize to different applications, then that gives you a lot of versatility to address whatever application it is, whether it's a frequency regulation or long duration for peak shifting, DC coupled for for storage, you start from that same fundamental block. So that, at a high level, that's how we sort of think about it and how we approach it.
Yeah, I want to take a moment and say thank you for anyone who is watching live. And obviously, if you're watching this in replay, you won't have this luxury. But if you have questions that you'd like to ask this esteemed panel, throw them out in the comments, whether you're on LinkedIn Live or Facebook, Twitter, or if you're watching through Crowdcast because you registered for this session on suncastsummit.com. If you have questions, we will feed those over to the panelists in just a few moments. I've got a couple of more probing questions or threads to pull, but would love to hear from the audience as well. Zach, one of the things that stands out from a hardware perspective, especially for a major global hardware manufacturer like Sungrow, a lot of us think about energy storage on the solar side from Merrick's perspective, or from maybe Sunrun's perspective at the putting it in a closet in a residential home. I'd love to hear how Sungrow is considering the packaging of storage and the way that you are helping the C&I market as well. I know that you guys are, if not the first, at least second largest in the U.S., probably on your way to first largest supplier of inverters. So are you seeing a big demand or a pull through from that middle market around storage?
Yeah, and absolutely. Probably not as much activities as we see on the utility scale side of things. The utility scale market is 5 times as large as the C&I market here in the U.S. So naturally, that pulls a lot of our resources. But what we've really focused on is enabling storage with our standard product catalog. So we just launched a new 250 kilowatt string inverter, which is really focused for that small utility commercial type of install that has a DC port that's built into it. So you could add storage. It's a string inverter, so it's a wall hanger. It has the built-in combiner box. And so really it's about putting things like that together. Previously, to integrate storage with a string inverter, it would have to be AC coupled, which shoehorns you into certain business models. So to be able to offer those architectures out of the box with no cost adders is a big deal. Our central inverters also have the same capabilities. So what you're seeing is it has the normal solar master DC combiner, but inside that combiner, it also has all of the storage ports. So you can add up to 1 or 2 to 1 storage for the nameplate of your solar. And so those products are the identical cost of what the products you were buying last year, but they have these ports and these capabilities. They have all the built-in controls. They have all of the standards and the UL certifications it requires to install. So I think that's really kicking things loose. Previously, a lot of the storage activities were structured around, I'm not trying to be negative here, but more boutique solutions. So you would buy a DC to DC converter from one supplier. You'd buy an AC to DC converter from another supplier. You would buy the software package maybe from a third supplier, or develop that yourself and really put that solution together. Now you can get products off the shelf that have those capabilities built in, and have the service infrastructure, have the bankability, everything that you need.
Yeah, it's interesting and fascinating to think how the large, sort of from the vantage point of the large manufacturer, you guys are able to, from Sungrow's perspective, respond to this disaggregation in the market and sort of the disparate nature that really makes it heretofore very difficult to integrate storage, right? I see Jacqueline and Merrick shaking their, nodding here along with us. Merrick, I would invite you, actually, you had a question earlier that we were discussing around the same topic. I'd invite you to ask that question over to Zach, if you would.
Yeah, no, sure, happy to. Zach, I was very curious, and it might be a naive question because I know the inverter market less well, but Having the experience that you do and the vantage point you do over both the solar inverter market and the storage inverter market, would you say that they are different in their maturity and therefore in how you would approach them, either from a design, products, distribution, marketing perspective, or is it pretty similar? It's the same fundamental technology, just packaged in a different way.
Yeah, so we have a myriad of products. We have residential products and residential storage products. We have the C&I space as well as the utility space. So you have to be specific on kind of which of the technologies. But I think what you're seeing is you used to have to bolt a bunch of Legos together to make your sort of building block. And now you're getting all the latest generation products that are releasing this year all have those capabilities built into the standard product. So you don't have the duplication of hardware, you don't have the duplication of installation and maintenance and cost. It's one control system that controls an inverter. Why can't that control a battery? Why can't all the inverters be bidirectional power flow? So I think that's really what we see is the maturity in that all these technologies somewhat existed, but you just couldn't get them in one package.
So does that mean, in terms of how it's put together, it's essentially the unlocking model of like all the functionality is there in the product that you buy, but depending on which package you take, some of the features are enabled and some of them are not? Is that essentially how it works? So basically, even if you're buying a one-directional inverter, it has two-directional capability. You just have to pay to unlock that capability. Exactly.
The previous generations of products didn't have those capabilities. And so they would have to be retrofitted. You'd have to add boxes and fusing and protection devices. But now you can get it all in one package and change firmware settings, change capabilities.
Okay, thanks. It looks like Nico dropped off again. So maybe, given that the ball is in my hand for doing the questions, could I pass this over to Amit? Because I'm curious how you see it from the vantage point that you have at the smaller scale of this. Is it a similar approach in terms of functionality you'd be taking, or is there a very specific sort of hardware setup that you're looking at for a specific application?
Well, I think it fits very much in line with what Zach's describing here, in the sense that you need to remove redundancy out of the system, right? And in the past, all we had was AC coupling architectures, which were simple to install, but had a lot of redundancy occurring. When you're using the battery storage, you're going AC to DC twice. And we see a lot of movement now towards more integrated products. And the market, if you talk to any developer, they want one throat to choke, right? They hate having to work with a whole bunch of different suppliers for different components to build the system, because what happens when something goes wrong is everyone starts pointing fingers in the other direction. So whether it's with an string inverter or with energy storage, what we're seeing in the marketplace is more of a movement to integrate and have one product offering, right? And you see this happening. So we think there's going to be some consolidation that's going to happen in the marketplace over time. And then for us at Yatta, our core focus is energy storage, the product itself. We're not building in our own inverter system. We're going to integrate with some very strategic partners on that front. So, for example, Zach's inverter could very well work with the Solar Leaf with some minor adjustments.
Okay. I'm pulling that around.
I was just going to comment that as a developer, it's mind-blowing how the technology advances are happening so quickly. When Zach was talking about what's happened in his space with the inverters, it is really hard to wrap your arms around everything that's changing, the different solutions that are available. And Omid, I would agree with you that it would be a lot easier if it was just one nice integrated solution. But it's great that it's evolving, and I'm glad that I'm hearing from you what some of these changes are, and that I can stay on top of it. And I think there's even a question from the audience about whether there's a process or standard assessment in place for our companies to evaluate solutions for sustainability or carbon footprints to manufacture our solutions. So I don't know if somebody wants to take that question.
I'll take it real quick. So when we developed this technology, we actually worked very hard to design it in a way where it's a cradle-to-cradle approach. We designed all the components, the thermal technology, in a way that at the end of its life cycle, it can easily be taken apart and recycled. And also down to our cell selection, right? There are many less expensive cells in the market that you can buy, but for us, it's we tried to find a cell supplier that actually could give us the longest duration, the longest LCO for our product offering. So the last thing you want is an energy storage solution that ends up in a landfill after 3-4 years. And so sustainability not only drives our product engineering decisions, it drives very much the core focus of what we're trying to do.
Hey, I appreciate you guys jumping in and batting some questions back and forth. I sure wish I had battery storage because my power went out and that's what kicked me out of the studio. But that's also why on the Suncast Summit we bring in such an esteemed panel who are old hats and pros on managing and navigating these types of summits. Does anyone else have a piece they would like to contribute there around the specific sustainability of your product? I'm actually curious, tagging onto that, if that is a sales feature or a benefit that some of you have used or thought about with regard to how you interact with clients.
I could maybe jump. Oh, go on, Jack.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say at Ameresco, that's one of the categories where we will show what the carbon savings are. So that certainly is one area. I mean, we'll show water savings, carbon savings, dollar savings. So we try to outline, those different categories and have a way to measure those savings.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a similar thing we look at it, yes, and we do in a few different ways how this comes across to clients. So the stats that are quite interesting on this now that Fluence has been, I think the first projects that we deployed are about 12 years ago or so. So there's actually a very long track record for some of these projects, and those first ones are still in operation, so they're still in their first life, so to speak. But cumulatively, they've now delivered nearly 7 terawatt hours of equivalent service. So if you put that in gas peaker fleet terms, it's a pretty sizable peaker fleet of emissions avoided. Granted, providing very different services, different duty cycles. But so if you look at the indirect of that, we're a mission-driven company in terms of what we're doing. We're aiming to transform the way we power the world, essentially, and move it towards a completely sustainable system. We do look at sustainability throughout the supply chain. The key part of that is obviously the batteries, and we look at, it's a similar sort of thing, cradle to grave, the recyclability point. And I think there are a lot of mistruths and various things out there on the internet about lithium-ion batteries and their recyclability. It's extremely high. It's just mostly done in Asia, particularly in China. And it's less established in Europe and in the US, and the same on the upstream side of things from a supply chain sustainability standpoint. Depending on the chemistry, you have some that, for instance, don't use cobalt, some that do. If they do, making sure that that's audited, tracked properly from a cobalt sustainability perspective. So it factors in a myriad of ways. In terms of client-facing sides of that, it usually does come up. Depending on the type of client, most of them are doing storage for similar reasons to us, because they want to make a meaningful difference in the company impact. So it's often a question that does come up. For utilities, it's probably only second to safety, and safety is one of the top topics that they'll want to talk about, which is also very valid as well.
Merrick, you mentioned earlier, almost in passing, that you guys, in particular when dealing with utilities, offer an additional benefit, and it's one that I was unfamiliar with prior to engaging with you in a conversation around how Fluence is thinking about integration of batteries, and that is this idea of virtual transmission. We got, in fact, a question from the audience wanting to follow up with you on that. Can you expound a little bit on what it means to have virtual transmission, how that works from a battery perspective?
Sure. So I'll pick a few examples because it's the best way of illustrating this. This is happening already. So we have projects that are doing this sort of thing in the US and Australia already, but in Europe particularly, both the UK and Germany are coming out with something similar, and there's something happening in France. So fundamental level, Germany's a great example of this. A lot of wind in the north, a lot of demand in the south, and transmission infrastructure in between the two, which is there, and it's very difficult to change or increase the capacity of. So you have a bottleneck which is costing billions of dollars to resolve, because you have to dispatch down the wind in the north and bring on generation that's not economic in the south of Germany, or you have to pay to route power through Poland or adjacent markets. So this is an expensive problem in the billions being spent every year, and as such, the German regulators have approved special virtual transmission projects, basically building batteries to act as basically backup power, to provide the contingency power on the power lines instead of having to leave a line redundant and unused, which is currently what happens. And by doing that, you use the same infrastructure that's already there, but at its sort of full potential, so that if one line goes down, you have a battery that basically kicks in with a relay system and provides the lost power. So from a stability perspective, from a reliability perspective, you're no worse off, but you've essentially unclogged some of that jammed system. And there's different ways of how you package that, but that's fundamentally the idea that the UK is looking at implementing as well, with all of the wind in Scotland and all of the demand in the south near London. So it's happening in a few different ways in a few different places, various regulatory barriers to overcome, but it's a really neat solution and actually a huge potential market for helping integrate renewables and getting towards 100%, which is, I think, what most of us want to see.
That is, it's fascinating. It makes me think about the high penetration of wind in the Oaxaca area of Mexico, and as well on the state side with Texas. So many disparate markets, and the way that power is being curtailed. It also makes me think about various interconnection points in other places in Latin America, like the northern part of Chile and the big population centers of southern Chile. So another element that is often talked about, and I don't see a lot around the discourse in the public view, is the idea of transactive power. We got a question from the audience specifically around transactive power. Everyone talks about transactive power, but are there actual markets where it's starting to take place? What are the mechanisms that are empowering it? The question specifically was for Ameresco and Jacqueline. Given that you're working on microgrids, how are you engaged in transactive power? And then I have a follow-on question that I'm curious about from an IPP perspective.
So I don't want to be a downer on transactive power. I love the concept, and I think people should pay for whatever it costs, but I don't see that it's here yet. And certainly I'm not an expert in everything. I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. I have followed the transactive power discussions over the years, and I just don't think it's down at that retail level yet. So we are working on other ways to monetize and show cost savings. We have different structures that we implement, whether it's a PPA or an energy performance contract, EPC. We're probably much more traditional in that regard. I guess you could say maybe in New York with the VEDR, there is some concept of showing what the actual costs are through that program, but I wouldn't say that's transactive power yet. I don't know, Nico, am I interpreting the question correctly? Because if I'm not, please put me on the right direction, because there's a lot of stuff going on up here.
Yeah, the question I think was around, and I think you are, the question was around whether or not Ameresco is seeing transactive power as a component of the microgrid engagement.
Not yet, only in the sense that if you can show, if you can do a microgrid where you're showing some type of bill savings and also providing sustainability, I wouldn't really say it's transactive power, but it's all how you define that term. So I hope I can follow up with whoever asked the question, because I would love to explain some of the different contracting mechanisms that we've used for these cases.
Nico, if I can just jump in, like that, I think refers back to my analogy. The solar and storage is still at like the computer level. Transactive power is when we get to the internet level of it, right? And I think it's coming. It's just a matter of utilities and how we form different business models around how energy storage can be monetized. I think the audience asked, are there tradable commodities that happen for energy storage? And that's, I think, when those types of mechanisms happen, that's when you'll see energy storage just go real big. But transactive power has always existed with solar and storage. It's called net metering. It's just done through a meter, right? Back when I installed my solar PV system almost 12 years ago, I had net metering, and I was basically offsetting and selling my kilowatt hours to my neighbors, but through the utility, right? It's a simple function of utility and regulation. And I think one thing that I think of recently with what's happened with COVID, I think there's going to be a lot of changes that happen with utilities and rates, schedules, and there has to be, right? Utilities make a bulk of their revenue from commercial buildings. And all of a sudden, we've shifted all of this demand from commercial buildings to residential, which has not ever been a moneymaker for utilities. It's just been a supply, right? And so what's going to happen is utilities are going to come back and have to increase rates. And the more that they increase rates, the more it's going to drive businesses to then further consider solar storage. And so then I think that's going to open up more opportunities for different types of market opportunities. But I agree with Jacqueline in some ways too. It's not the hype that some people make it out to be with blockchain and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. But I'm reading.
Is what throws you off.
Yeah, no, I'm reading the question now, and I agree with what you said. And as I read the question, as a tradable commodity, I do think we are seeing that in some regards, because energy suppliers are now taking, instead of taking a short-term position and to serve their load, right, in states where there's competitive supply, retail supply, or even in California where you have community choice aggregation, even the CCAs are looking, okay, well, I should take a longer term position. And that way, they're kind of hedging what they would have to rely on the wholesale market for. So, and I think that the concept of building storage, to even just sell those ancillary services, so that those load serving entities can hedge their supply that's not far off. That's probably already, I think that is being done. So I know there's definitely some companies doing that throughout the US.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that question in from Abid, who asked about the tradable commodity, opening up new revenue streams. It ties into what I think will be our final question as we round out the session here. When we teed up this session as a component of the summit, one of the things that, from an innovation perspective, I'm thinking about are not what are the business models that we currently enjoy, but what are the business models that will be enabled, that will be capable of thinking through once storage achieves the kind of scale that we all believe that it will. I'd love to kind of go around the horn here and hear your thoughts on that. We'll start with you, Merrick, but are there new business models that are on the horizon that once we reach some unknown point, we will be able to enjoy because of storage? And maybe as you answer that question, what are the regulatory hurdles that prevent us from getting there now? A lot of talk and thought is around the idea of 100% renewable penetration, and that batteries are going to really be the key to unlocking that. So I'd love to hear from you. We'll start with you, Merrick. How do we unlock new business models, and what are the hurdles to get there?
It's a big topic to unpack, but I think there's two things. So one, it's not necessarily about scale, because as storage gets cheaper with scale, you can do more things. That's pretty obvious, and it's cheaper to do them. So there'll be lower barriers to entry. So for instance, places where we're already seeing that solar plus storage makes sense, like Hawaii, having just solar and storage and basically using the batteries to deliver solar at night makes sense there because fuel costs are high. We're there in the US to an extent, but that's because of the investment tax credit. But as the scale goes, either incentives or specific structures fall away, and it becomes more commonplace everywhere. But equally, that's never going to get you fully there. There's a few different ways of unpacking this, because people talk about long duration storage. And to me, lithium ion is long duration storage already. It can do 4 hours, it can do 6 hours competitively. As costs fall, it can do 8 hours. Maybe it can do 10, 12, who knows? It's not going to ever be weeks of storage competitively. And to get to full 100% renewables, you do need weekly and seasonal storage as well. But you can get about 80% renewables on an annual basis with just daily storage, and that's a huge market in itself. So to take that alone in the UK, that's about 39 gigawatts of storage that's needed. So really, it's not about the scale. I would say it's around the new things we discover we need to solve as we go along the path. So I started with Ireland, and I'm going to finish with Ireland. To get to near 100% real-time renewables, you need digital inertia. You need batteries to be able to deliver effectively inertia when there is no synchronous generation on the grid. And we've shown that they can, and that actually, despite them not having spinning parts, they're better at providing it, because they respond so quickly that they start picking up the frequency before it's hit bottom. And that, by definition, is what inertia is there for on the grid. So we're discovering that. We're at the sort of cusps of it in some markets, but who knows what we need to discover after that to keep going.
And I'll chime in there that while we've more or less focused around solar and how we can augment solar with energy storage and with batteries as a storage technology, in the broader context of clean energy, we can't leave out our big brother hydro, which is the original long duration storage clean energy capacity, right? Yeah, for those who are watching thinking, gosh, these guys are only talking about batteries and solar. I wonder if you guys might, if the other panelists might have something to chime in on there around future business models, what the regulatory hurdles are, and thank you, Merrick, for the contribution of so many different buzzwords like virtual transmission and digital inertia that I haven't thought about.
You hand out bingo cards at the next one. I'll see if I can hit them all.
So, Nico, I envision a world where energy storage is on a level playing field with other technologies. And we're starting to see progress, with 841 at FERC and the implementation. But right now, the system benefits associated with energy storage are not quantified. And that's a problem. When you put energy storage on the grid, you're really operating everything much more efficiently. Therefore, reducing the carbon footprint, your capacity prices are coming down. I mean, it's good for everybody, but those types of benefits are not yet monetized. So that's one challenge. I would love that to be overcome. The second piece is that when you have multiple jurisdictions, a state jurisdiction and a federal jurisdiction, it creates confusion about how you can implement that storage resource. So if you want to do, say, a non-wire alternative, it becomes much more complicated because you're crossing into maybe a federal jurisdiction and a state jurisdiction. And those rules are being refined and worked out, and we're seeing tremendous progress in that arena so that you really can value stack all those different benefits of energy storage. So I imagine a place when those corrections are made and energy storage will be on a level playing field and can be quantified for the value it's actually providing.
Fantastic.
The next, or I'll keep mine very simple. I think it's as simple as leasing. When you have technologies that become more advanced and less costly, you can have financial institutions that can lease the equipment. That equipment can then generate kilowatt hours, and you're then therefore circumventing a lot of regulation that traditional utilities have to fall under, right? So I think progressive utilities will get into the business of leasing solar storage equipment and find unique ways. In fact, some already are. You look at some of the bigger players in energy storage, they're actually backed by utility companies, just not within their own territories. They're trying to form business models outside of their own territories. So that's my 2 cents.
Fantastic. Well, as we wrap up, I'd love to hear any parting thoughts from you all as our panelists around the ways that energy storage is in fact enabling growth of renewables, and I'll just say from the outset, I'm really grateful to hear from such a diverse and thoughtful group of folks who are looking at different places in the marketplace. We didn't have anyone from electric vehicles to discuss how obviously all these batteries are sitting in cars dispersed around our energy internet. But as we think about this topic of storage and innovation, I'd love to, or as we wrap up rather this topic, I'd love to start with you, Zach, and give you all a chance to give some parting thoughts to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen that storage is already a part of every solar system that's planned for the future with some level. So, you know, I think it's here. It's just to tack on to what Jackie said, it's been difficult to quantify it. I'd really like to see some more innovation on the modeling side, so you can look at different DC to AC ratios, different architectures like DC coupled, AC coupled, or maybe both, and find that inflection point where at that location you can generate a good return. And if you can generate a good return, there'll be lots more projects. And so I think we're doing everything we can to enable cost-effective solutions, but where I'd like to see the market really is open up on the modeling side, so we can do more analysis and look at interconnects differently, look at existing assets differently, look at you know, all the different markets differently. Right now, I think we're all stuck in our own modeling tools, and we're using some off-the-shelf stuff. And really, I think that's where the innovation needs to happen next if we're going to enable further deployments.
Omid, how about you?
Yeah, final thoughts. I think I agree with what Zach is saying, and I think what Jacqueline echoed. There's a lot of work to be done on how we value and monetize energy storage. I think for us, it's trying to get it into the hands of the solar developers, the regional solar developers that have been engaged with customers for so long and know how to do that best. I think that's one of the first keys, is to create a simplified product for them. And I'd like to finish off with, we're borrowing something from local restaurants. If you buy a solar leaf today, you also get a Yatta roll. Every purchase of a solar leaf. So Jacqueline, Mark, I expect some POs from you after this.
I hope so. I love it. I love learning about your product. So thank you.
That is fantastic.
Parting thoughts. I hope we were more entertaining than we've been for my little friend Roxy back here. I don't know if you can see her, but she's sound asleep.
She snuck in there about 20 minutes ago.
No, my parting thoughts are thank you very much, Nico, for the opportunity. I think energy storage is at another turning point where it's just going to be part of everybody's tool in the tool shed. I think we're just about there.
Fantastic. And you, Merrick?
Yeah, I don't think there's much to add either. It's been fun. Thanks, Nico, for organizing. Thanks to the other panelists. Been great hearing your thoughts as well. I found myself nodding along quite a bit, which is good. Yeah, nothing I think further to add.
Fantastic. Well, I am certainly grateful for you all, and thank you for joining us. I have a few parting thoughts around the rest of the summit. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring myself to the forefront and say goodbye to you all. Stick around for a couple more minutes, and we'll talk with you, the audience, about what's to come for the rest of the Suncast Clean Energy Summit. If you have been registered over at suncastsummit.com, then you have been entered into win one of our giveaway prizes, which is the 1 year or 12 months rather of our Suncast Guild. That is our private membership, access to exclusive content with Suncast, from Suncast, our Ask Me Anythings, and a number of private events that we offer as well. You can join that. You can actually make sure that you're registered for that by going to bit.ly/win the guild. And if you haven't already, please do join our Facebook group, which is called the Clean Energy Guild. You can search that in Facebook groups, Clean Energy Guild. We have dozens, I think nearing 100 members now of clean energy professionals, where you can both seek and give mentorship. You can ask questions if you're curious about how to get into the industry, or if you're working in the industry and trying to figure out how to do X or Y activity and grow your own impact in the industry. I invite you to join us and join the conversation. If you want to follow along with our community, we are making daily announcements over in the Clean Energy Guild in Facebook as well. And I would be remiss not to thank as well our main sponsor, SunGrow, and our track sponsor, Radiant REIT, who so graciously contributed along with others, as you see here on this list, to help us make today possible. As we said before, SunGrow is not only one of the largest, but the world's most bankable inverter manufacturer. SunGrow is consistently the inverter of choice for EPCs and developers in the United States and across the globe. You can learn more at sungrowpower.com. And again, our innovation track sponsor, Radiant REIT, is the first ever investment trust to bring mortgage REITs to the solar industry markets, offering developers a lower cost of capital and comprehensive financing that matches the operational life of a project. Learn more at radiantreit.com. But that's not it for the Suncast Clean Energy Summit. That simply is it for our track today. Feel free to register if you're interested in what's happening in Latin America. We're going to kick off the next day of our and final day of our summit on May 6th, looking at the Latin America market. We have an exciting lineup, starting with James Ellis from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, kicking off the day, giving us a State of the Union of Latin America clean energy. I invite you to jump in there, make sure you're registered, make sure you check out the schedule and register for each one of those sessions as they are posted. Get on our email list so we can keep you up to date. And last also but not least, if you are curious at all about Merrick Kubek and his story, and you're a follower of the Suncast podcast, then make sure you tune in tomorrow, coincidentally, I think. But I'm excited about Merrick's episode, which is going to go live tomorrow on the Suncast podcast. You can learn more about that at mysuncast.com. We're super grateful for all of you here in the clean energy market, or those who are curious, that we have given you an opportunity to learn more about many different areas of clean energy today. Kicked off the day thinking about innovation with Chuck Swoboda, and then we had a number of sessions around how to go from innovation to implementation. What does finance and the tax equity markets look like in the current economic crisis? How is NREL spurring innovation? And then wrapping up the day here with the energy storage session. We are going to have a standalone showcase. If you watched any of our other product showcases like Solar Graph and Solar Support, we're going to have a standalone product showcase with featuring energy storage from Blue Planet Energy. So make sure you're registered over at suncastsummit.com, and you will no doubt have a chance to watch that. It'll be live as you all are watching. I see 5 of you still on Facebook. Thank you for sticking around and tuning in. Look forward to seeing you again as we bring more of this type of content. If you are curious about why we didn't feature some other aspect or some other topic, please hit me up at Nico Mayo on Twitter, or you can find me very easily over on LinkedIn. In the meantime, I'm going to go take a break. Been on the camera for 6 hours, and I'm so grateful for our esteemed panelists, all of the guests, and all of the sponsors who help make this content free for you to enjoy today here on the Suncast Clean Energy Summit. Thanks again for tuning in. Remember, you are what you listen to, or as we've said today, what you're watching. Thanks for giving us your only non-renewable resource, and that is your time. We honor you for that, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.